Old preacher's problem number 2, I'm not done with my lozenge yet. What to do? It was important, or I wouldn't have taken one. I know. Good way to practice my diction. I'll speak with a lozenge, and it's practice. See how well you hear me. Appreciate your patience. I'm a little rusty at this. Last Sunday, I introduced a sermon reflecting over the years of my ministry, a retrospective, which I'm picking up again this morning in part 2. After all, I told my wife Beth I couldn't do this in a sermon, but I could do it in 2. And I supposed it was about time. It occurred to me that in my 12 years preaching here on a regular basis, never did I lay out for you, in a comprehensive way, my story, part of my testimony, my faith journey. And golly, Christians sharing their journeys has always, from day one, been as common as a slice of cheddar cheese with apple pie in Michigan. In some parts of the country, they never heard of that, So let's see, where did we leave off? Oh, yes. We're about to visit my first appointment. 1971, the Burr Oak United Methodist Church outside Sturgis down in St. Joseph County. Anybody know Burr Oak or Sturgis or St. Joe County? Or anybody here from Michigan? You look a little lost. Wonderful. Wonderful people, wonderful church, wonderful start for a young pastor. Got to thinking Pastor Cho has set the bar so high by starting every sermon with a joke. Let me see. I decided I only know one joke about a minister starting in his first church. It was the first day on the job, and he decides to go out into the neighborhood and ring a few bells and knock on a few doors and introduce himself. He rings the first bell. A woman opens the door and exclaims, "Neil Diamond!" And the minister says, "Oh, no, ma'am, no. Many people make that mistake. I'm just a bit of a look-alike. I'm actually Pastor Johnson from the corner church. Just want to invite you to service Sunday morning." Goes to the next bell. A woman opens the door and exclaims, "Neil Diamond!" And the minister says, "Oh, no, ma'am, no. Many people make that mistake. I'm just a bit of a look-alike. I'm actually Pastor Johnson from the corner church, and I just want to invite you to service on Sunday morning." He goes to the third bell. It's always the third one, isn't it? Brace yourself. This time, the door is opened by a beauty queen of a young woman, just his type. She's got long hair, long lashes, high heels, and short shorts. And she takes one look at the pastor and says, "Neil Diamond." And he says, "Sweet Caroline, ha, ha, ha. Good times never seen." Oh. Put that in your Pastor Cho and smoke it. I know, you're wishing I knew at least one other joke about ministers starting out. Maybe it would be 10% better. So I find myself in this delightful little village, Burr Oak, named after one of our trees, the Burr Oak, you may be familiar with. A little village I'd never heard of. Why do they call it your first church? A, because it's your first church. Or is it B, that it's going to be flooded with firsts? A lot of them they likely didn't tell you about in school. The demands of regular preaching, first budget building, budget raising, first baptism, first communion, first saturation in nightly after nightly committee meetings, first wedding, first funeral, first tragedy, Shortly after I arrived, I married my first groom to his bride. Shortly before I left Burr Oak, I officiated his funeral from the same altar. You're in the ministry now. Edith gave me a dose of reality. She was the proverbial little old lady, and her philosophy was that because the parsonage was church property, and because she was a contributing member, it was partly her property too. Therefore, she could just pop right in unannounced, anytime, day or night, if the door happened to be unlocked. My wife and I were newlyweds, maybe running around in our underwear or our Under Armour or whatever, and we'd come clipping around a corner, and there stands Edith. Really? That didn't go on for too much longer. But she took the cake. And we decided we couldn't have our wedding cake and Edith too. Sorry. Boy, if you hadn't gotten that one, I was just going to quit right now. I think go for coffee. Thanks for working with me on that. Late one night, the parsonage bell rang. It wasn't Neil Diamond either. A man standing at my door pointed to his wife and baby out in the car. The child was sick, he said, needed to go to the hospital, but he was broke and the gas tank was on fumes. He wanted $50. I, the naive idealist, just out of seminary, you tend to come out of seminary so eager to save the world and everybody in it in a hurry. Took it hook, line, and sinker, and I gave it to him in cash. What was I thinking? Probably, who would have the audacity to my face, on my doorstep, to ask for a cash handout, pinning it to a sick child on a false pretense? Never heard of such a thing. Even in Alpena, Ha! Next morning, I was the laughing stock of the coffee shop. Hey, Pastor, know what that guy did when he left your place? Headed straight to the pub, bought rounds for everybody. Talk of the town. But the bar crowd is grateful to you this morning, and you're the most popular preacher around for now. It cost me $50 to learn 2 fundamentals. The downside of having the parsonage right next door to the church. And that unfortunately, generous charity requires equally genuine scrutiny. Far as I know, the child lived a long and healthy life, and none of those bar guys ever showed up in church. I wasn't that popular. Late one other night, my bell rang. Wish it had been Edith, come to think of it. It would have gone better. The guy maybe thought he was Neil Diamond. He was drunk as a sailor, and I've seen some of those. He wanted to talk. Well, he talked. I listened. Oh, I got my stuff in here and there where I could, but of course, nothing we discussed came to any good. And that morning, back at the coffee shop, a new church friend told me, well, Pastor, it's useless to talk to a drunk. Maybe sometime if you're lucky enough to catch him sober, you'll get a little quality time out of him or into him. All those times we read about in the Gospels where Jesus encounters somebody possessed of a demon, you'll remember that often as not, Jesus speaks first to the demon and casts it out. And then when it's gone, he speaks to the person. Your sins are forgiven. Follow me. Go and sin no more, whatever it's to be. And today, for you and for me, if we are faced with somebody, probably a beloved, who in that moment is drunk or high or not well due to some emotional, mental, physical condition, perhaps one of the many dementias to some degree, and one is just not himself or herself. And the conversation is not going well for either party. And by this, I'm not referring to something like a pretty common and fundamental failure to understand, or maybe a miscommunication, or maybe some confusion or a memory loss or something. But if the conversation is becoming ugly, angry, hurtful, maybe potentially damaging to the relationship, it is because in those moments we are speaking to the demon and not to the person. He or she, whom we have known and loved, is not home right now. He or she is out. So predictably, it doesn't go well talking to demons. God help us to the end that we might, we pray, get some quality time with this person as him or herself when the demon is not home and the demon is out. In the meantime, it's very important for us to be well aware of to whom we are speaking and to make appropriate allowances. Three years later, 1973, my bishop appoints me to First Church Midland, to the ministerial staff of 4 of us in a very large downtown church. Wonderful people, wonderful church. My focus will be youth work and Christian education. And part of that meant being trained and licensed to drive the full-sized 40-passenger bus to junior and senior high retreats all over the state, also annual mission trips to, say, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. That was a hoot, accompanied by staggering responsibility. All those lives behind you, all those precious lives behind you every minute. Once a week during Lent, we would host a prayer breakfast in the church for senior highs very early in the morning before school. The program was a tradition that I inherited in that church. It was always very popular. How these kids would roll out of bed well before the crack of dawn to come to church before school for a hot breakfast, devotions, prayers, and some genuine, caring Christian fellowship. Well, it's just worth giving up a little shut-eye, you know. You realize once you've experienced it that starting your day that way and adding it to your week will keep you coming back for more at any age. A good hot breakfast, devotions, some prayer time, and genuine Christian caring fellowship. I think if we skipped breakfast, they would have come for the spiritual food. I think. After breakfast, the couple dozen youths who needed a ride would clamber onto the bus, and I'd drive them to their school. Should have seen this coming. As we approached each school, pulling into the Circle Drive, I felt like a real bus driver then. These kids would slide and hunker down as low as they could go in their seats, or they would be on the floor. Every one of them, so as not to be seen through the windows by their peers on a church bus. And on the side of that big old bus were huge black letters that said, Midland First United Methodist Church. There was no hiding that. It was the length of the vehicle, just about. And when the bus stopped, one at a time they'd slink down the steps through the door, head down, hoodie up, hoping to make it into the building before any peer recognized them. It was something to see. Now, this was in the mid-'70s, and it is something when you think about it. These youth were the cream of the crop in that community. They were smart, they were gifted, as we say, they were good kids. They were good kids. They loved their church, they loved that program, they loved each other, and they loved God. What's not to like about that? What's to have to hide about that? The world is starving for more of it right now. But somehow the culture had already changed so drastically from the decades of my youth, when everybody had a church, in name anyway. Most went to church, at least for appearances. These youths were terrified that their reputations would be sullied if it got out that they were seen on a church bus. Good heavens, today it would be global in seconds on Facebook, right? And of course, I tried to talk to them about this, and they fully recognized what was going on, but there would be no changing it. Isn't it what we, the church, have always been up against? Working to define where the church is in culture, and in light of that, how effectively to be out with our faith. Meanwhile, in the words of that great theologian Paul Simon, there must be 50 ways to leave your peer group. Just hop on the bus, Gus. I'll never forget one senior high mission trip. We had pulled the bus into a rest stop in North Carolina. And I was doing a head count to make sure everybody was aboard before we closed the door and hit the road again. Uh-oh. One girl was missing. Where's Kim? Not her real name. Where's Kim? Somebody says, isn't that her, Reverend Tom? Way over there running through that field. Oh, Lord. Didn't see this coming either. Kim was using our mission trip as a launch pad for running away from home. And she was well on her way, clipping across a field in North Carolina. Brilliant plan. I'll give her points for that. I'll hitch a ride with these Christians in North Carolina and then foot it from there, you know. Brilliant plan. Also dumb, really dumb, and terrifying. I took off on foot. Couldn't do it today. Giving chase. She needed to be saved from herself and for herself, and I, doggone it, needed to be saved from pulling the bus back into the Midland Church parking lot 10 days hence without the same number and the same names of the people who left with me from there in the first place, right? Not going home without everybody. Not sure how I did it, but with God's help. Remember the book, Are You Running With Me, Jesus? I caught up to her with a modified flying tackle. I think unconsciously she probably let me catch her. The same way I married Beth, but that's a later story. I know what we're going to talk about at lunch now. And Kim and I sat down there in that field together and started to talk. I persuaded her back to the bus. Maybe it was a test, to see how far anybody would go to save her. Would anybody chase her? Would anybody do a flying tackle? Would anybody love her that much to really do that? Thank goodness we did. Can you imagine? We're on a 10-day work camp. Can you imagine how I watched her like a hawk for 40 days and 40 nights? Oh, hardly sleep a wink. And it gave me pause to reflect upon how sometimes the ancient scriptures just leap to life and to reality, as in when a lamb just needs to run from God and everybody. And shepherding means literally leaving the 99, sitting on a bus, and running like a tackle that the lost may be found. Small wonder, maybe, that it was while I was in Midland that I went back to school at Central Michigan University for a second master's, this time in counseling. Since I already held the Master's of Divinity degree, I began self-styling a program in pastoral counseling, capital P, capital C, which is a seminary degree track unto itself. It may be that if I had it all to do over again at Garrett Theological, I might have majored in this instead of the ministerial track. So what's pastoral counseling, you may ask? Many have never heard of it. They know what it is to counsel with the pastor, but they don't know it as a profession or a calling. It's a therapeutic field unto itself that A, upholds the best of a pastor's care and shepherding and all that might encompass. B, it respects the role that faith plays in healing and in growth. And C, it contains clinical skills that are beyond the one or two classes that one might take in the ministerial curriculum. 5 years later, 1978, I'm appointed to the church up in Cass City. Wonderful people, wonderful church. At last, I'm somebody. You know, the musical question, you're nobody till somebody loves you. The organist in the church and her husband owned and operated the local bakery and coffee shop, not all bad. This is where they taught me there are two kinds of people. Those who do the coffee shops in the morning, those who do the bars at night. There's a life lesson, I guess, but I never thought of it in that way. Even better than the bakery, her husband, Stewie, old enough to be my father, and we became fast friends. That, in and of itself, was a delight. To befriend and socialize a great deal with someone old enough to be my dad. I don't know, I was kind of new, I didn't expect that. Stewie owned and operated the bakery coffee shop, but he also owned and operated his own plane. Started out with a little Cessna, that 240 or whatever it was, a little four-place. Ended up, before I left, with a Beechcraft Bonanza. Cruised at 200 miles per hour, retractable landing gear. Woo! That's that one with the swallowtail, in the back end. Oh, the places you'll go. Come fly with me, come fly with me. Let's fly away. And we did. frequently, after coffee and donuts. Some flights were unforgettable, like my first night flight. We were on our way home from Detroit City Airport, en route to Cass City International. Oh, Bob Jacoby, my dear friend, is a Cass City. Bob, that hurts, doesn't it? I was hoping they wouldn't laugh. I know that, yeah. But I had to put it in, didn't I? Cass City International, that's a mown cornfield. Literally. With a lot of deer on it sometimes, right, when you don't want them to be there. So I was getting nervous about how Stewie was going to find our cornfield at 11 o'clock at night amidst all that darkness down there. And he just kept saying, I'll show you, I'll show you. When we were within range, he took the microphone, dialed the radio to the proper frequency, pushed the talk button, and said, lights. And brrr, both sides of that runway lit up like Chicago O'Hare. The local pilots had saved up enough nickels to install that system, and they made it voice activated. Next time we flew at night and we're coming home, he asked me if I'd like to do it. Sure. I said, now let's see. I just dial here, push the talk, and say lights, right? He said, well, actually, you can say anything you wish. And I'm going, ooh, this is a big decision. This is a moment, man. This is another first. What to say? Oh, I got it. You know how doctors are sometimes accused of playing God? Eat your hearts out. I took the mic, pressed to talk, and said, let there be light. And there was light. Genesis 1:3. I got a sermon illustration out of that one. Guess I just did again. It is a powerful feeling to be gliding hundreds of feet above the earth, to speak and have it happen. And that's about all I have to say about that. That sermon illustration doesn't go too far. 5 years later, 1982, I'm appointed to the ministerial staff of downtown Ann Arbor's First Church. Wonderful people, wonderful church. Of my 14 years there, of which I'm so proud, frankly, to pick one or two things, I think of ministry to a homeless population. Among other duties, such as running the Stephen Ministry, I was in charge of 2 programs for the homeless. One that slept men in our church, men only as a group, and another that alternatingly hosted up to 5 families living in our building a week at a time. Sound at all familiar? Who'd have thunk it that this could actually be done, that people would open their churches and say, you folks come on in, you can live here for a while. And we'll feed you, and we'll give you warmth, and we'll give you a good bed and a good pillow and a good blanket and other needs, and counseling on various levels to help you get your feet underneath you again. It came into Ann Arbor and was readily accepted, I'm happy to say. Back in that day, it was known as NIHN, the National Interfaith Hospitality Network. And yep, you guessed it, today it is the very same program, so highly successful in our area and as a part of our church. Family Promise is the new name, and it's still fulfilling its promise to families. Safe, sound, and healthy temporary shelter, and a very impressive record of finding homes for these families. Tough job. Very impressive how well they do it. 2, since one can never get too much training in counseling, I went back to school a 3rd time. Going blue this time, of course. Church is right downtown Ann Arbor. For a 3rd master's at U of M's School of Social Work, Interpersonal Practice. How could I not? God had put the School of Social Work right across the street from the church. All I had to do was from the office to class, office to class. I couldn't not. And I was blessed that Ann Arbor First reworked my job description to include up to 20 hours a week in pastoral counseling, and I used them all. And then 14 years later, 1997, I find myself appointed to the church in Davison. Wonderful people, wonderful church. You wouldn't believe. So many people. That last worship service in Ann Arbor, where I'm in the line and I'm shaking hands with people and then they're saying goodbye, and you would be delighted. I wish I could give you a percentage or the number, but it happened quite a bit. People would shake my hand, wish me well. They'd say, Davison, eh? And I'd go, yup, and they'd go, Whiteys. Yeah. And I had already been there. I knew what they meant. Yeah, that's right. In the Davison church, wonderful people, wonderful church. And I was still enjoying firsts, like working in a very close and a very personal way, and working hard at it, much more than I did with some of where the Ann Arbor church was at that time, in contemporizing worship here, in the development of a praise band and a drama team and overhead video screens and redesigning the chancel and the soundboard to support it. And surprisingly, so out of step with what was trending in churches at the time, to better satisfy more traditional tastes, simultaneously purchasing the pipe organ. Some would have said, you're out of your minds. You know, you just get this praise band going, that's where it's at, man. What are you going to put all this time and work into a pipe organ for? Purchasing the pipe organ and all of its myriad pipes and parts from the Flint Oak Park United Methodist Church, dismantling it, refurbishing it, reinstalling it in our sanctuary, by and large with the skills and the heavy lifting done by many of our own lay people. To this day, we still endeavor to offer the best of the traditional, I hope, and the best of the contemporary. And we just need to keep getting the word out that that's what we're doing here, and we're working hard at it, and I think we're working well at it. There's no need for us, to slink down in our pews like we're hiding on the bus, Gus. And of course, in the Davison Church category, there is this other really, really big personal piece. Completely unbeknownst to me, unbeknownst to Beth, known only to God, I was appointed not only by my bishop to serve the Davison Church, but Beth and I were appointed by God to meet, to fall, to marry. You may remember the day I popped the question. I proposed to Beth in front of God and everybody during Easter morning worship, the main service, 2002. I was preaching my Easter sermon. We had a real pulpit at that time, which was centered here, one of the big old wooden glorified, wonderful pulpits we used to use traditionally. I was preaching my Easter sermon with a focus on new life, and suddenly I found myself announcing that I could use a little new life myself. And that for this I had an Easter sermon illustration. So I walked down out of the pulpit and approached Beth. She was sitting in the very back pew over here. And I asked her to stand. On a live mic, I told her, with eye contact, of my desire for newness of life, that kind of a spiritual Easter this time. I'm ready now, you know. I ran for 10 years until she caught me. And nervously, I began rummaging through my vestments looking for the ring. Have you ever watched a pastor in alb, stole, cincture, neck cross, and a wire intricately woven through his clothing trying to find a pocket with the ring in it? People thought I had the heebie-jeebies, you know. I found it. It was a scene out of a movie. I opened the box, popped the question, and awaited her reply. A pregnant hush fell over the congregation. The silence was deafening, as we say. People held their breath. What will she say? I was holding my breath. She was not answering. Wait, she said something. What was it? A voice called out from the back of the room. I think it was Paul Porter. I may be wrong. You'll remember Paul. What'd she say? And I said into the microphone what she said. She's going to get back with me. She may have been thinking, you're going to take a risk like that. I'm going to, put it in your face for a little while, make you squirm. Well, she got back with me within seconds, thank God, with her yes. Understandably, Beth was stunned, In one moment, I reduced her to a sermon illustration and then asked her to marry me. It's a little confusing. It's a lot to take in. I get that. Beth and I met as two single persons living happy, productive, fulfilling lives as most singles do. Couples tend to forget that, I think, or overlook that reality. We were two single persons living happy, productive, fulfilling lives. Today, as spouses, we are living happy, productive, fulfilling lives as most marrieds do. It's just different. But I wouldn't change a thing. And I don't want life to change a thing. And of course it will. So every day we give thanks. And from our wedding day forward, I have thanked God nearly every night for my bishop's appointment to the Davison United Methodist Church that brought to me, among innumerable good things, and still does, and my wifey. Some folks get all excited about their Wi-Fi. I don't even know what it is, but for me it's wifey. Well, there we have it, my dear friends, a rear view of my ministry. Not that it's all over and done with. Here I am preaching 2 Sundays in a row. In my retirement, I combine some lower key, slower pitch ministry and some of the music and commentary I do in some different venues with different groups. I am, I trust, nowhere near St. Paul's, Jerry, farewell comments to Timothy in our lesson this morning as he gazes in his rearview mirror, looking back on a ministry with his oft-quoted, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. However, I am, if not an old preacher now, an older preacher. And you may remember, one of my favorite things to do in sermons over the years, especially here, I think, was to utilize what's known as old preachers' stories. Some sermons from centuries ago contain the most wonderful and timeless anecdotes and metaphors, sermons from the 19th, 20th, even late 18th centuries and so on. Sometimes they're kind of hard to find. Let me close with this little gem that helps to sort out the difference between two important concepts that I consistently preached in every one of those 5 churches: belief and faith. And at this moment, it will become a kind of a summary, sermonic summarization, I guess I would say. A circus tightrope walker asked a man if he believed that the performer could walk this tightrope pushing a wheelbarrow. The guy thought for a moment, sized up the situation, and said, "Yeah, I believe you could walk this rope pushing a wheelbarrow." That's belief. "Okay," said the tightrope walker, "now I want you to get into the wheelbarrow." That's faith. And so you see, however we get there, and faithfully remain there, best we can, by all the ins and outs of our own journeys, looking forward usually through the window, the windshield, and from time to time in the rearview mirror to understand where we've been. In the final analysis, this is where God wants us all to be, in a wheelbarrow. So may it be, God being our helper. Amen.